You were told you live in a nation. You were told you live in a democracy. But in reality, you live inside a financial operating system, one that decides which countries rise, which fall, which industries grow, and which generations struggle. It doesn't need a throne or a flag. Its authority doesn't come from armies or elections. It comes from something far more powerful: obedience. Money governs quietly, efficiently, and completely. And the greatest illusion it ever created was convincing humanity that it was just a neutral tool. This is Money Moves, where finance, power, and history come together to reveal what really drives the modern world. We grow up learning that money represents value, that it's simply a medium of exchange. But what if that story is incomplete? What if money as true purpose is not to measure value, but to direct behavior? The emergence of the global financial system wasn't an accident, a conspiracy, or the invention of a single mastermind. It was centuries of trial, error, and innovation, where rulers, merchants, and bankers slowly learned how belief itself could be turned into wealth. To see how this system evolves, you have to rewind to a time when money still had mass, when wealth meant livestock, grain, salt, precious metals, things you could hold, store, or defend. For most of human civilization, money was tied to effort or resources. If you wanted more of it, you had to produce something, or conquer someone. Then came a revolutionary idea, an idea so powerful it would rewrite the world. Money didn't need to be real, so long as people agreed to pretend it was. The earliest full-scale experiment began in China during the Song dynasty. The empire was so large that moving coins across it became impossible. So officials printed paper notes, backed by nothing but the authority of the emperor. These notes were promises, symbols of value, and it worked. Trade exploded, cities grew, and merchants flourished. But when the government printed too much, trust evaporated. The currency collapsed, and the lesson was forgotten, at least for a while. Centuries later, European merchants rediscovered the same principle. Medieval trade routes were dangerous. Carrying gold invited theft. So Italian bankers created letters of credit, pieces of paper that represented wealth somewhere else. They weren't just safer. They separated money from matter. No family understood this new reality better than the Medici of Florence. With double-entry bookkeeping, they invented a system where wealth could be created on ledgers. Loans became assets. Debts became income. The Medici didn't need to mine gold. They wrote it into existence. And in doing so, they quietly took power from kings and handed it to commerce. But the real transformation came in the 1600s. The Dutch Republic, a tiny nation with hardly any land, built a global empire using an invention the world had never seen: the joint stock company. For the first time, ordinary people could buy shares of a voyage, a war, or an entire trading empire. Wealth wasn't tied to labor anymore. It was tied to ownership. The Dutch East India Company became wealthier than kingdoms, and corporations became extensions of the state itself. England watched, adapted, and perfected the model. The British East India Company wasn't just a business. It governed continents, minted money, and commanded armies. And London became the nerve center of global finance. But the true pivot point, the moment money stopped being a resource and became a system, happened in 1694. When the Bank of England was born, the government needed money for war. Private financiers offered it with a condition. They would issue banknotes backed by the government as debt. That meant the more the government owed, the more money they could create. Debt stopped being a burden and became the engine of the empire. From then on, expansion had no limits. War wasn't constrained by gold. Governments could finance anything, so long as someone believed in the promise behind the paper. The 19th century cemented the system. Global banking dynasties emerged. Rothschilds, Morgans, Barings, not as creators of wealth, but as custodians of trust. Their influence wasn't built on military power, it was built on credit. When governments failed, they rescued them. When markets crashed, they rebuilt them. And with every crisis, their influence grew. By the time the 20th century arrived, money had fully detached from physical reality. In 1913, the United States established the Federal Reserve, giving private institutions the authority to create the nation's money supply. The government stopped issuing money directly. It began borrowing it. Interest became policy. Debt became normal. Then came 1944. Bretton Woods. The US dollar became the backbone of world trade. Nations tied their currencies to the dollar. The dollar was tied to gold. On paper, it was stability. In practice, it gave America unprecedented control over global finance. And in 1971, the final tether snapped. Nixon ended the gold standard. Money became pure belief. Fiat currency. Nothing backed it except trust in the system itself. From that moment, the world ran not on wealth but on credit. Governments borrow to fund growth. Corporations borrow to expand. Families borrow to survive. And the institutions that control credit control everything. Inflation becomes a tool. Debt becomes permanent. Crises become opportunities to consolidate power. We saw this clearly in 2008. When the system cracked, governments didn't save homeowners. They saved the institutions that engineered the collapse. They created trillions of dollars overnight. Not to fix the system, but to reboot it. The public called it a bailout. Economists called it quantitative easing. But in reality, it was the same principle perfected over centuries. Print, promise, repeat. Today, the next evolution is already underway. Digital money, programmable currencies controlled by central banks. Transactions recorded instantly, purchasing behavior traceable. Funds adjustable with code, a financial system where compliance is built into the software of everyday life. And the most astonishing part, people will accept it the way they accepted paper over gold, credit over cash, and debt over savings. Because the system doesn't force obey, it rewards participation. It makes compliance comfortable. The real divide today isn't between rich and poor, left and right, east and west. It's between those who understand how the system works and those who operate inside it without realizing it. The former influence outcomes, the latter absorb consequences. But history shows that no monetary illusion lasts forever. Every credit empire eventually collapses when belief fades. Rome, France, Britain, all learned the same lesson. When trust breaks, the system resets. The ones who survive are never the ones with the biggest bank accounts. They're the ones who understand what money actually is. An agreement, a narrative, a tool held together not by gold or government, but by confidence. So, how do you escape the trap? You can't dismantle the system, but you can outgrow it. You build skills, assets, relationships, and awareness that the system can't inflate. The more you understand its rules, the less power it has over you. Money rules the world, but only because most people never question why. If this opened your eyes, hit subscribe. History isn't just a story. It's a warning. And I'll show you exactly where to look next.